"You have no right to tell us what to do." That's what he said. My son, Richard. His voice wasn't just loud, it was sharp, like a piece of glass. It cut through the low hum of conversation, the soft clinking of cutlery on my best china, the warm smell of the rosemary lamb I had spent all afternoon preparing. Everything just stopped. "We all know why you really left Dad 30 years ago." There it was. He didn't just say it, he threw it. He picked up the single most painful, private, and sealed away part of my life, and he hurled it onto the middle of my polished dining room table for everyone to see. His wife, Sarah, froze with her wine glass halfway to her lips. My granddaughter, Chloe, who is only 16, looked down at her plate as if the pattern on it held all the secrets of the universe. The silence that followed was so heavy, so complete. I think I could feel the weight of it on my shoulders. It wasn't an empty silence. It was full of shock, of embarrassment, of a son's absolute cruelty. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was breathing hard, his face flushed with a kind of righteous anger he felt he'd earned. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd finally found the key, the one word, the one secret that would break me and make me give him what he wanted: more money from the trust, an advance he wasn't due. He saw me as a stubborn old woman, a dragon sitting on a pile of gold. He didn't see his mother. He saw a bank vault, and he had just tried to blow the door off with dynamite. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind of calm they say you find in the eye of a hurricane. While everyone else was reeling from the blast, I was in the quiet center. My hands, which had been resting in my lap, didn't tremble. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. The tears would have been a victory for him. I remember focusing on the tiny, intricate weave of the linen napkin beside my plate. I followed the threads with my eyes. 1, 2, 3, in, out. A perfect, simple pattern. Then, I raised my eyes from the napkin and met his. His smugness was already starting to curdle into confusion. He was expecting a scene, shouting, tears, a dramatic collapse. He got none of it. I slowly, deliberately, folded my napkin and placed it on the table. I pushed my chair back. The legs didn't scrape against the wood floor. They made a soft, gliding sound. I stood up. My spine felt like a steel rod. I picked up my handbag from the floor beside my chair, and only then did I speak. My voice was quiet, not a whisper, but low and clear. So clear that everyone heard it in that unnaturally silent room. "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for reminding me." I didn't look at anyone else, not at Sarah's horrified face, not at my granddaughter's bowed head. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I didn't hurry. Every step was measured. I could feel their eyes on my back. The click of the front door closing behind me was the loudest sound I had heard all night. It was the sound of an ending. The drive home was silent. I didn't turn on the radio. The streetlights painted long yellow stripes across my dashboard, then disappeared. The hum of the engine was the only company I had. When I pulled into my own driveway, the house was dark and quiet. It was just a house. My family had been in that other house, and I had just walked out of it. I didn't turn on all the lights. I just went into the living room, the moonlight filtering through the large windows. I didn't sit down. For a long time, I just stood there, in the silence of my own home, and I let the echo of his words fade. He thought he was talking about a secret. He thought he was talking about my shame. He had no idea what he was really talking about. He was talking about my foundation. I didn't sleep that night. Sleep was impossible. Instead, I went up to the attic. The air was cool and smelled of old paper and cedar. I knew what I was looking for. In the back corner, under a dust sheet, was an old leather trunk. It wasn't full of treasures. It was full of the life I had before this one. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, on top of a few folded clothes, was a small cardboard box tied with string. My hands were steady as I untied the bow. Inside were the only things I took with me 30 years ago. There was a bus ticket, one way, from Boston to Philadelphia, a key to a rooming house, and a photograph. I picked up the photo. It was me, but not me. A woman in her early 40s, with a bruised shadow under one eye that the camera hadn't quite caught, but I knew was there. She was standing in front of a nondescript brick building, holding a single suitcase. She was looking at the camera, and there was fear in her eyes. Yes, but underneath the fear, there was something else. A flicker of something hard and unbreakable. Determination. That woman in the photograph, she had just left her husband, a powerful, charming man who was a monster behind closed doors. She had left with $200 hidden in her shoe and the clothes on her back. She left 2 teenage children, Richard and his sister, because she knew if she tried to take them, he would find her and drag her back, and things would be worse. She left, promising herself she would build something new, something strong, something safe, and one day she would bring them into that safety. Richard remembered it as when Mom left us. He never understood I was running for us. I sat there on the attic floor, the old photograph in my hand. I didn't feel the pain of that memory. Not anymore. What I felt was the echo of that woman's strength. That woman in the picture, she worked 3 jobs. She cleaned houses, she waited tables, she took night classes, she saved every single dollar. She started a small business from her rented room, a little catering service. It grew. She was smart. She was relentless, because she had to be. She was building a fortress. That money, the money that grew into a small fortune, the money Richard was so desperate to get his hands on, it wasn't just money. It was crystallized survival. Every dollar was a night I didn't cry. Every investment was a door I had locked against the past. And when I had enough, I created the trust fund. Not for me, for my grandchildren. To give them the security I never had, I put Richard and his sister as trustees, but I kept control. I built the fortress, and I held the key. I did it to protect them, to protect the future from the kind of man I had escaped. And tonight, my own son had stood in my house, a house built on that strength, and he had tried to shame me with the very fire that forged me. He looked at that photograph metaphorically and saw a weak woman who ran away, a dirty secret. He forgot he was looking at a survivor. A cold clarity washed over me. The hurt was gone. The shock was gone. All that was left was a quiet, resolute purpose. He had used my past as a weapon to hurt me. He thought it was my weakness. He had just reminded me that it was my greatest strength. He had reminded me why I built the fortress in the first place, not just to keep the world out, but to protect the legacy inside from threats, even when the threat came from within. Time to raise the bridge, I whispered to the woman in the photograph. I put the picture back in the box, closed the trunk, and went downstairs. I walked into my study, the wood cool beneath my bare feet. I sat at my desk, and I didn't hesitate. I picked up the phone. It was late, but I knew my trust manager, Mr. Davis, was a night owl. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Davis," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. "It's Victoria. I need to schedule an appointment for first thing in the morning. We need to make some immediate changes to the family trust." The sun came up the next morning. It always does, doesn't it? That's the one thing you can count on. After the darkest night, the sun has the audacity to just rise, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and orange, as if nothing in the world is wrong. I had been sitting in my armchair by the window, watching it happen. I hadn't gone to bed. I just sat there, the old cardboard box on the floor beside me, and I let the night pass. When the first rays of light hit my face, I didn't feel tired. I felt scoured, clean. Like a fierce storm had passed through and washed away all the clutter, all the noise, all the useless, sentimental things I'd been holding on to. The love I felt for my son had become a tangled, painful thing over the years, a constant negotiation between my heart and my checkbook. But what he did at that dinner table, it wasn't a negotiation. It was a hostile takeover. And the storm that followed in my heart had left behind a very clear, very quiet landscape. I stood up and went to my closet. I didn't reach for my usual soft cardigans or comfortable dresses. I chose a charcoal gray suit, a well-tailored blazer, sharp trousers. I put on a simple silk blouse underneath. I even put on a pair of low, sensible heels. It was armor. It was the uniform I used to wear when I was building my business, the clothes I wore to meetings where I was the only woman in the room and had to command respect before I even opened my mouth. I was no longer a mother going to see her financial advisor. I was a CEO, and I was going to a board meeting to protect the integrity of my company, the company of my family. The drive into the city was different that morning. Usually, I noticed the traffic, the people rushing to work. But that day, all I saw was the architecture, the strong bones of the buildings, the steel girders, the solid foundations. I thought about the men and women who designed them, who planned every detail to make sure those structures could withstand storms, time, anything the world threw at them. I had done the same with my family's future. I had designed a structure to protect them. Richard had just shown me a crack in the foundation, a fatal one. He had revealed that he was not a steward of the family's future, but a threat to it. He saw the trust not as a safety net for his own children, but as a personal account he was entitled to drain. Mr. Davis's office is on the 34th floor of a glass and steel tower downtown. It's a quiet place. The carpet is thick, the walls are paneled in dark wood, and the air smells faintly of leather and old books. It's a place of order, of rules. It felt like a sanctuary. His assistant, a kind woman named Martha, showed me in immediately. Mr. Davis stood up as I entered. He's a man in his late 60s, with a calm demeanor and eyes that have seen every kind of human drama play out across the polished surface of his desk. He has managed my finances for 25 years. He knows more about me than most people, but he has the profound discretion of a priest or a doctor. He just nodded, his expression one of polite concern. "Victoria," he said, his voice gentle. "Thank you for coming in so early. Coffee?" "Please," I said, sitting in one of the 2 leather chairs facing his desk. The chair was cool and firm against my back. He poured a cup from a silver carafe and placed it on a coaster beside me. He didn't press. He just sat and waited. He knew this wasn't a social call. I took a sip of the coffee. It was black and strong. "Mr. Davis," I began, my voice even. "I need to make an amendment to the trust, the family trust." He simply picked up a pen and a legal pad. "Of course. What did you have in mind?" I looked past him, out the large window at the city sprawling below. The purpose of the trust, as you know, was never to make my grandchildren rich. It was to make them secure, to give them a foundation so they could build their own lives without the kind of fear I once knew. He nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on me. I've always understood that. I fear, I continued, turning my gaze back to him, that I have overlooked a crucial part of that education. I have provided for their financial security, but I have not adequately provided for the security of their character. I've been naive. I assumed certain values would be passed down. I was wrong. I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't need to. I want to add a new clause, a condition for the beneficiaries. He leaned forward slightly, pen poised. Go on. Upon reaching the age of 21, I said, the words coming out clear and precise, as if I had rehearsed them for years, and before any principal distribution can be made to them, each beneficiary, Chloe, James, and any future grandchildren must complete 2 requirements. I paused, took another sip of coffee. First, they must enroll in and complete a certified educational course. The course will focus on understanding the dynamics of domestic abuse, both physical and financial. It must be a course that teaches them to recognize the signs, to understand the cycle of control, and to know the resources available to help. Mr. Davis wrote, his pen scratching softly on the paper. He didn't look up, but I could feel his attention was absolute. Second, I went on, after completing the course, they must perform 100 hours of documented volunteer work. It must be at a registered, vetted charity, an organization that provides shelter, legal aid, or counseling to people, mostly women and children who are escaping violent homes. I stopped. I had laid it on the table, the heart of it. Mr. Davis finished writing and then looked up at me. There was no surprise on his face, only a deep, quiet respect that felt more comforting than any words of sympathy could have. A meaningful provision, Victoria. It will give them a perspective that money can't buy. It will give them the context for where the money came from. I corrected him gently. It will teach them that this isn't just a number in a bank account. It is a legacy of survival, a responsibility. They will inherit the fortress, so they damn well better understand what kind of dragons it was built to keep out. I understand completely, he said. He made another note. And what about the trustees? This was the second part, the blade. Richard is to be removed as a trustee, effective immediately. On what grounds? He asked, his voice still perfectly neutral. The voice of a man who deals in legalities, not emotions. His actions have demonstrated a fundamental misalignment with the spirit and purpose of the trust, I said, using the cold, corporate language I knew would be necessary. He views the assets as a personal resource rather than a protected legacy for the beneficiaries, his own children. His judgment is compromised by his own financial desires. He is no longer fit to act in their best interest. Mr. Davis simply wrote it down. And his sister, Eleanor? Eleanor will remain, for now. Very well, he said, placing his pen down. I will have the amendment drafted immediately. It's quite straightforward. It will just require your signature. He was as good as his word. Within an hour, Martha brought in a fresh document, the pages still warm from the printer. It was a simple addendum, 2 pages long, written in dense, legal language. But I understood every word. Mr. Davis slid it across the desk to me, along with his own pen. It was a heavy, black fountain pen with a gold nib. It felt substantial in my hand. It felt like a tool. An instrument of power. I read every line carefully. The new clause was there, exactly as I had dictated it. The section removing Richard as trustee was clear and unambiguous. My son thought he had hurt me by unearthing my painful secret. He thought he was throwing dirt on my name. But here, in this quiet office, I was taking that same dirt and I was turning it into soil, fertile ground where empathy and understanding could grow for my grandchildren. He had used my story as a weapon of shame. I was turning it into a shield of wisdom for the next generation. This wasn't revenge. It was a course correction. It was an act of love. My hand was perfectly steady as I signed my name at the bottom of the page. The ink was a dark, definitive black. Victoria M. Ashford. It wasn't the signature of a victim. It was the signature of the architect. I pushed the document back across the desk. "Thank you, Mr. Davis." "It is my privilege, Victoria," he said, and for the first time a small, genuine smile touched his lips. "A very wise provision indeed." When I walked out of that building and into the bright morning sun, I felt lighter than I had in years. Richard was probably at home, waiting for my angry, tearful phone call, waiting for me to break. He had no idea that he hadn't broken me. He had just reminded me how to build, and I had just reinforced the walls of my fortress. For the next few days, there was silence, a deep, profound silence from Richard's side of the family. It was the kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. It's the tense, humming silence before a storm breaks, the stillness in the air when you can feel the pressure drop. I knew he was waiting. He had thrown his bomb, and now he was crouched in his bunker, expecting a counterattack of tears and recriminations. He expected me to call, weeping, begging him to take back what he'd said. He expected me to bargain. That's how it had always worked. He'd push, I'd get upset, and eventually, to keep the peace, I'd give in. But this time, I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't send a single signal. I went about my days. I tended to my garden, pulling out the weeds with a firm, satisfying tug. I spent an afternoon at the library, losing myself in the quiet rustle of pages. I made soup. I put my house and my mind in order. I felt a strange sense of peace, the kind that comes from making a difficult but necessary decision. I had drawn a line. Now, I was simply waiting for him to run into it. He lasted 4 days. I knew the letter would have arrived on a Tuesday. Mr. Davis had it sent by registered mail, a crisp, cream-colored envelope bearing the letterhead of his firm. Not my name, not a personal note. A formal, legal document. It would have landed on their polished hallway table with a quiet, official thud. The letter itself, as Mr. Davis had described it to me, was a masterpiece of cold, corporate clarity. It wasn't addressed to Richard personally. It was addressed to him in his capacity as parent and natural guardian of the minor beneficiaries, Chloe and James Ashford. It politely informed him of a recent amendment to the trust's bylaws, ratified by the trust's grantor, that's me. It would have outlined the new educational and volunteer requirements for the beneficiaries. And then, in a separate, brutally concise paragraph, it would have stated that, as per Section 4B of the trust agreement, his position as a trustee had been terminated due to a fundamental conflict of interest with the stated mission of the trust. I can picture him reading it. Not at first. His wife, Sarah, probably brought it in with the rest of the mail. He would have seen the law firm's name and assumed it was some routine financial statement. He would have opened it casually, maybe while sipping his morning coffee. The first paragraphs about the new conditions would have just confused him. Domestic abuse courses, volunteer work. What nonsense is this? And then he would have reached the final paragraph, the one about him. I imagine the confusion would have evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, hot rage. His world, the one where he held all the emotional cards, had just been upended by a piece of paper. My phone rang at 9:05 a.m. on Tuesday morning. I looked at the screen. Richard. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I let it go to voicemail. I was not going to have this conversation on his terms, in a blaze of his anger. 2 minutes later, it rang again. I silenced it. Then the text messages began. The first was just a string of question marks. The second, call me, now. The third, what the hell is this letter? What have you done? I read them, and I felt nothing. No fear, no regret. It was like watching a child have a tantrum from behind a pane of soundproof glass. His anger couldn't touch me anymore. It had no power. He tried calling Mr. Davis, of course. Mr. Davis had already warned me this would happen. Richard, used to getting his way, would assume he could bully or charm his way through the hired help. He would have called, his voice probably a mix of feigned friendliness and underlying threat. Mr. Davis, there seems to be a mistake. My mother is emotional. She's not thinking clearly. But he would have met a wall. A calm, polite, legally impenetrable wall. Mr. Davis would have simply referred him back to the document. The amendment is perfectly legal and has been executed according to the grantor's wishes, Richard. My duty is to the trust and to the grantor. I can't discuss her motivations with you. If you have any further questions, your lawyer can contact our legal department. That word lawyer would have been like a bucket of ice water. It signaled that this was no longer a family squabble. This was a legal matter. He had thrown a stone in an emotional pond, and I had responded by draining the pond and replacing it with a concrete foundation. The final text message from him came late that afternoon. The tone was different. The rage was still there, but it was now laced with the bitter taste of dawning horror. He was finally starting to understand. Not just what I had done, but why I had done it in this specific way. You're making my children take a course about domestic abuse? You're making them volunteer in a shelter? You're using that against me? You're forcing them to listen to your lies? This is sick. You're punishing them to get back at me. I sat in my quiet living room and read that message, and I felt a profound sense of sadness for him. He still didn't get it. He saw it as a punishment, as me using my story. He couldn't comprehend that it wasn't about him at all anymore. It was about them, Chloe and James. He had tried to humiliate me with my past. He thought my secret was a source of shame. So I took that shame and I turned it into a requirement for enlightenment. I made it the official family curriculum. To access the future I built for them, my grandchildren would have to understand the past I survived. They would have to learn the empathy he so spectacularly lacked. They would have to look into the darkness he tried to use against me and learn to recognize it, to fight it, to help others escape it. It wasn't a punishment. It was an inoculation. I was vaccinating my grandchildren against his moral sickness. I finally picked up the phone, but I didn't call him. I called my granddaughter, Chloe. It was late afternoon, and I knew she'd be home from school. She answered on the first ring, her voice small and hesitant. "Hi, Grandma." "Hello, darling," I said, my voice warm and steady. "How are you?" "I'm okay," she said, but I could hear the strain. "Dad is really angry about a letter." "I know," I said gently. "That's why I'm calling. I want you to know that it has nothing to do with you or your brother. I love you both very much. This is about ensuring the family money is used in a way that is wise and good." There was a pause. Then she asked a question that showed she had more insight than her father ever would. "The new rule, the volunteering, is it about, what Dad said at dinner?" I took a breath. "Yes, darling, it is. It's about turning something that was meant to be ugly into something useful, something that can help people. Oh, she said, and in that one small word, I heard a universe of understanding. I heard the beginning of the lesson. Okay, Grandma, I think I get it. We talked for a few more minutes about her classes, her friends, normal things. When we hung up, I felt a deep sense of rightness. The storm had broken. The letter had done its work. Richard was raging, yes, but he was raging against a door that had already been closed, locked, and reinforced. He had tried to test my boundaries, and in response, I had simply redrawn the map, and on the new map, the path to the family's future no longer ran through him. He came on Saturday. I knew he would. A letter is impersonal. A phone call can be ignored. But a man standing on your doorstep is a fact that must be dealt with. I saw his car pull up through the kitchen window. He didn't just park it, he seemed to wrestle it into place, the tires crunching on the gravel with angry energy. He stormed up the walkway, his shoulders set, his face a thundercloud. I didn't rush to the door. I poured myself a glass of cold water, took a slow sip, and then went to answer. I opened it before he had a chance to pound on it. He stood there, breathless with fury. For a moment, we just looked at each other. I saw my son, the boy I had raised, but his face was twisted into the mask of a stranger, a greedy, entitled man I didn't recognize. He saw, I suspect, not his frail, aging mother, but a formidable opponent, the architect of his downfall. "Let me in," he said. It wasn't a request. I simply stepped back and held the door open. I led the way not to the comfortable living room, but to my study, the room where I had signed the papers, my territory. It was a room filled with books, with evidence of a life lived thoughtfully. It was a room of quiet power. I stood behind my large, mahogany desk. He remained in the middle of the room, a caged animal looking for a weak spot in the bars. "How could you?" he finally exploded, the words tumbling out. "How could you use my own children to punish me, to humiliate me in front of some lawyer?" I let his words hang in the air. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I met his rage with a stillness that was absolute. "This isn't about punishment, Richard," I said, my voice calm and level. "And it certainly isn't about you." "Not about me?" He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You rewrote the entire trust. You cut me out, and you have the nerve to tell me it's not about me? You did this to hurt me because of what I said at dinner." I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the son I loved. I saw a strategic problem to be solved, and the solution was clarity. "On the contrary," I said, "I did this because of what you said at dinner. You wanted to talk about the past. You wanted everyone at that table to remember why I left your father 30 years ago. You threw it in my face as if it were a shameful secret." I leaned forward slightly, resting my hands on the cool wood of the desk. "Well, you were right about one thing. It is important. We should remember." He looked baffled, his anger momentarily short-circuited by my agreement. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about education," I said, my voice taking on the patient tone of a teacher explaining a difficult concept. "That story, my story, is not about shame. It's about survival. It's about recognizing a toxic, controlling environment and having the courage to escape it. It's about starting with nothing and building a fortress to protect your future. It is a lesson in strength, resilience, and the critical importance of financial independence. You presented it as my dirty laundry. I have decided to reframe it as the founding charter of this family's prosperity. He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. He was trying to process it, trying to find an angle for his anger, but I wasn't giving him one. You wanted to remind everyone of that history, I continued, pressing my advantage. I agree. It's a vital lesson, so I have made it a permanent part of the curriculum. Your children, in order to inherit the assets that were built from that survival, must learn the lesson. They must understand the dragon their grandmothers slayed. They need to learn how to spot dragons for themselves. It's the most valuable thing I can possibly teach them. His face was a storm of conflicting emotions. He was losing, and he knew it. He tried a different tactic. So you're forcing them to wallow in your misery. That's your idea of an inheritance. No, I corrected him sharply, my voice losing its patience for a moment. I am teaching them empathy. I am teaching them to see the world beyond their own comfortable lives. You see that trust fund as a cash machine, Richard, a prize you've earned simply by being born. You have forgotten, or perhaps you never learned, that it is a shield. It was forged in a fire you cannot begin to imagine, and you have proven yourself utterly unfit to wield it. I picked up the heavy fountain pen from my desk, the one I had used to sign the amendment. I held it up. This is the source of my power, Richard. Not the money, but the wisdom to know how to protect it. You tried to use my pain to gain control of the money. Instead, I am using my pain to teach your children the meaning of true control, self-control, financial control, and the wisdom to protect themselves from men like your father. And from men like you. He was finally speechless. He was completely and utterly disarmed. I had taken his attack, his most powerful weapon, and I had reforged it into a tool for my own purpose. He couldn't argue that the lesson of survival was unimportant without sounding monstrous. He couldn't claim I was being cruel without revealing that his only concern was the money, not his children's moral education. Every path he could take was a dead end. I had checkmated him using his own move. You're insane, he finally sputtered, but the words had no force. It was the last gasp of a defeated man. No, I said, placing the pen back down with a quiet, final click. I am independent. For 30 years, I have tried to be a mother. I have tried to keep the peace, to smooth things over, to give you the benefit of the doubt. But you made it clear at that dinner table that you don't see a mother, you see a bank. And my maternal duties are now secondary to my duties as the grantor of this trust. I walked around the desk and stood before him. There were no tears in my eyes, no anger in my heart. There was only a vast, quiet liberation. You lost the right to teach your children about this family's legacy, I said, my voice soft now, but carrying more weight than any shout. So I will teach them. Through the terms of my trust, you are dismissed, Richard, from the board and from the center of my life. My story no longer belongs to you. It belongs to me, and I will tell it my way. He just stood there, looking at me, as if for the first time. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, gaping understanding. He had come here for a fight, expecting to break me. Instead, he had been dismantled, piece by piece, with logic and a truth he could not refute. I walked to the study door and opened it. You can see yourself out. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked away, his shoulders slumped. He looked smaller. The front door closed behind him, and this time, the click wasn't the sound of an ending. It was the sound of a beginning. My beginning. The moment the architect finally took full possession of the house she had built. After that last conversation, the silence returned. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the tense, humming silence of a brewing storm. It was the peaceful, settled quiet after the rain has stopped. The air felt clean. My house felt like my own again. Richard didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't come back. He had tried to break down my door, found it replaced with a solid steel wall, and had finally, it seemed, retreated. For a while, not much changed on the surface. I continued to tend my garden. I read my books, but inside, everything was different. A heavy weight I hadn't even been fully aware I was carrying had been lifted. It was the weight of managing Richard's expectations, of tiptoeing around his temper, of constantly negotiating my love against his greed. By drawing that final, clear line, I had freed myself. I was no longer just a mother, or a widow, or the keeper of a painful secret. I was simply Victoria, the architect of my own life. My relationship with my grandchildren, Chloe and James, began to subtly shift. At first, there was a distance. I knew Richard was feeding them his version of the story, the tale of the cruel, manipulative grandmother who was punishing them to get back at him. I didn't fight it. I knew that words were cheap. Actions were what mattered. So, I started with simple invitations. Not to my formal dining room, the scene of the crime, but for walks in the park, trips to the museum, afternoons spent baking cookies in my sunny kitchen. I didn't mention the trust. I didn't mention their father. We just talked about their school, their dreams, their friends. I listened. For the first time, perhaps, I was able to build a relationship with them that wasn't filtered through their parents, that wasn't tainted by the unspoken presence of money. Chloe was the first to come around. She was 16, old enough to sense the emotional currents flowing beneath the surface of our family. One afternoon, while we were pruning roses in my garden, she finally asked the question that had been hovering between us. "Grandma," she began, her hands still as she held a pair of shears, "Dad says you hate him now." I stopped my work and looked at her. Her eyes were so much like mine. "I don't hate your father, Chloe," I said gently. "I will always love the little boy he was, but I do not respect the man he has become. There's a difference, and sometimes loving someone means you have to stop enabling their worst impulses." "He says the new rule in the trust is crazy," she mumbled, looking down at a rose bush. "Does it seem crazy to you?" I asked. "To learn about the world? To understand that some people have lives much harder than ours, and to spend a little time helping them?" She was quiet for a long moment. "No," she said, finally, meeting my gaze. "It doesn't seem crazy. It just seems sad that it has to be a rule." And in that moment, I knew I had won. Not against Richard. I had won the future. As the years passed, the trust amendment, which had been a tool of defense, slowly transformed into a cornerstone of a new family tradition. When Chloe turned 21, she dutifully enrolled in an online sociology course about family violence. She never spoke to me much about it, but I could see the change in her. There was a new thoughtfulness in her eyes, a deeper well of compassion. Then came the time for her volunteer hours. She chose a local women's shelter, the very kind of place that would have been a lifeline for me all those years ago. The first time she was scheduled to go, she called me, her voice nervous. "Grandma, would you come with me? Just the first time?" My heart swelled. "Of course, darling. I would be honored." I drove her there, that first Saturday. It was a simple, unassuming brick building, much like the one in my old photograph. We spent the morning in the children's playroom, a bright, cheerful space filled with donated toys. We didn't do much. We read stories to toddlers. We helped a little boy build a tower of blocks. We served juice and crackers. But as I watched Chloe interact with those children, her earlier nervousness replaced by a gentle, maternal warmth, I saw the lesson taking root. She wasn't just fulfilling a requirement. She was connecting with a piece of her own history, a piece of my history, without me ever having to say a word. It became our thing. Every few weeks, I would join her at the shelter. We would sort donations, help in the kitchen, or just sit with the women and listen. They didn't know who I was or why I was there. To them, I was just another volunteer, an old woman with a kind smile. But for me, it was a pilgrimage. I was walking back into the darkest chapter of my life, but this time, I wasn't alone. I was with my granddaughter, and I wasn't a victim, I was a helper. I was turning my pain into purpose, right before her eyes. When James, her younger brother, came of age, he saw it not as a strange punishment, but as a rite of passage. "It's my turn to do the shelter thing with Grandma," he announced proudly. He chose to use his hours helping with the shelter's overgrown garden, and together, he and I turned a weedy patch of land into a beautiful, productive vegetable garden that helped feed the residents. We worked side by side, our hands in the soil, talking about everything and nothing. Richard became a ghost in this new life. He saw his children forging this deep, meaningful bond with me, centered around the very secret he had tried to use to destroy me. He saw them developing a worldview rooted in empathy and service values that were completely alien to him. He had lost his moral authority. The checks from the trust still arrived to cover their expenses, but the real inheritance, the legacy of strength, the family story was now being passed down directly from me to them. He had been bypassed. One day, after a long afternoon at the shelter, Chloe and I were sitting in my car, tired but with the good, settled feeling that comes from useful work. She was scrolling through her phone and then paused, turning the screen to me. It was a picture a fellow volunteer had taken of us. We were sitting at a small table, laughing with a young mother while her child showed us a drawing. We looked happy. We looked like a family. "I like this picture," she said softly. "This feels more real than any of those fancy Christmas portraits Dad always makes us take." I looked at the photo. The old one, the one I kept in the box, was of a woman standing alone in front of a brick building, her face a mask of fear and determination. This new one was of a woman sitting with her granddaughter inside a similar brick building, their faces full of light and laughter. The story had come full circle. The wound had not just healed, it had become a source of strength, a garden where new life could grow. "Me too, darling," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Me too." I had started by building a fortress to protect my money, but in the end, by defending it, I had built something far more valuable. I had built a family, a real one. And that was a legacy Richard could never touch. The tea in my cup is cold now. It's funny how the loudest explosions in your life eventually fade. For years, the memory of that dinner, of Richard's face, of that final confrontation in my study, was sharp and clear, like a piece of broken glass I kept wrapped in velvet. But time does what it does. It doesn't erase the scars, but it softens their edges until they become just a part of the landscape of your skin, a map of where you've been. Years passed. Chloe finished her degree in social work, a path I have no doubt was shaped by those Saturdays at the shelter. She met a kind man and they married. I danced at her wedding. James went off to college to study business, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of old fear. Business was Richard's world, a world of numbers and acquisitions and bottom lines. I worried that his father's nature might be lying dormant in him, but I had laid the foundation. I had to trust the structure I had built. Richard became a footnote. We didn't speak. I would see him at Chloe's wedding and later at the baptisms of his grandchildren, my great-grandchildren. We were polite. We were civil. But we were strangers, occupying the same space, separated by a chasm of unspoken history. He looked older, tired. The anger had been replaced by a kind of weary resignation. He had lost, and he knew it. He hadn't just lost access to the trust. He had lost his children's respect, a currency far more valuable, and one he had no idea how to earn back. He was a king in a kingdom of one. The true test, the final exam, came last year. James turned 25. According to the bylaws of the trust, he was now eligible to receive his first major distribution of the principal, a substantial sum of money, enough to buy a flashy car, to put a down payment on a luxury apartment, to travel the world in style, enough to do all the things I imagine Richard had always dreamed of for himself. Mr. Davis handled the transfer, as he always did, with quiet efficiency. I received a notification that the transaction was complete, and then I waited. I didn't hold my breath. I just waited. I trusted the work I had done. I trusted the boy I had gardened with, the young man who had listened to my stories about the stock market with the same attention he gave to the stories of the women at the shelter. A week went by. I was in my garden, my hands in the warm earth, when my phone rang. It was James. "Hi, Grandma," he said. It wasn't the voice of a boy anymore. It was the deep, confident voice of a young man who knew his own mind. "Hello, darling," I said, leaning against the old oak tree. "How are you?" "I'm great, Grandma. I'm better than great, actually. I wanted to tell you something. I wanted you to be the first to know." My heart gave a little flutter, the way a mother bird's might when she watches her fledgling take its first flight. "Oh? What is it?" "The money from the trust," he started, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I made my first investment." "Did you now?" I said, keeping my own voice light. "A wise stock? A new tech company?" "No," he said, "something better. I went to my university's financial aid office yesterday. I set up a scholarship. It's not huge, but it's a start." I closed my eyes. The sunlight felt warm on my lids. "A scholarship? For what?" "It's called the Fresh Start Scholarship," he said, and his voice was filled with a quiet pride that was worth more to me than all the money in that trust. "It's for students entering the social work or public policy programs, specifically for students who graduated from the public school system and come from single-parent or low-income homes. For kids who had a rough start but are trying to build something better. Kids who want to help others do the same." The tears came then, not tears of sadness or pain. They were tears of pure, unadulterated grace. They rolled silently down my cheeks and dripped onto the soil at my feet. All those years ago, I had escaped with $200 hidden in my shoe, my own desperate fresh start. And now, the fortune that had grown from that desperate act of survival was being used to fund 100 new beginnings for others. The cycle was complete. The poison had been turned into medicine. "Grandma?" he asked, a note of concern in his voice. "Are you there?" I found my voice, though it was thick with emotion. "I'm here, James. I'm here. That is the most wonderful investment you could have possibly made. I am so very, very proud of you." And then he said the words that were the final, beautiful dividend of a life of struggle. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said simply. "Thank you, Grandma. Thank you for teaching me what the money was really for." We hung up, and I stood there under the oak tree for a long time, my hand resting on its rough, steady bark. The story was finally over. Not my life, but the story of the wound. It no longer ached. It was no longer a secret. It had been transformed into a legacy of strength, passed down to a generation that would use it to build, not to break. My son thought my secret was my prison. He waved it like a weapon, thinking it would lock me in a cell of shame forever. He never understood that, for a survivor, a prison can become a fortress. And the story of how you escaped that prison, that becomes the greatest lesson of all. Richard didn't want to learn. He just wanted the keys to the treasury. So I left my legacy to those who were willing to listen.